The year is 479 BC. Greece stands on the edge of destruction. Athens lies in ruins, its temples still smoldering from Persian fire. Across the plains of Boeotia, a massive Persian army waits, an army larger, richer, and deadlier than anything the free cities of Greece could field. At its head, Mardonius, cousin of King Xerxes, determined to crush the last spark of resistance. But on this day, on the fields near Plataea, farmers in bronze armor, Spartan warriors, and Athenian hoplites would stand shoulder to shoulder. They weren't fighting for an empire or for a king. They were fighting for their homes, their freedom, and the survival of Greece itself. What followed was not just a battle, but the final clash that would decide the fate of Western civilization. It's late August, 479 BC. The summer sun is beating down on the Boeotian plain, a landscape that's about to become a chessboard for one of ancient history's most pivotal battles. The Persians, under Mardonius's command, had carefully chosen their ground. They'd built a formidable, stockaded camp on the north bank of the Asopus Ridge, a strategically sound position that offered protection and access to open ground. Inside this sprawling fortress were the diverse forces of the Achaemenid Empire, skilled Asiatic archers, swift Median cavalry, the fearsome immortals, the emperor's elite guard, and even Greek turncoats, like the heavily armed hoplites from Thebes, who had chosen to side with the invaders. Estimates vary, but Mardonius commanded a force of roughly 100,000 to 120,000 men, a truly overwhelming number. Opposite them, on broken ground, interspersed with orchards and cut by the winding Asopus River, the allied Greeks were arrayed. Their shields, emblazoned with the symbols of their city-states, formed a formidable wall. The Spartans, under the command of the regent Pausanias, nephew of the legendary Leonidas of Thermopylae, held the place of honor on the right wing, a position reserved for the most formidable fighting force. The Athenians, led by the respected general Aristides, anchored the left, facing off against their former countrymen, the Thebans, in the center. A solid block of contingents from a multitude of other Greek cities stood ready. Their rough count? Around 80,000 men, almost all heavily armored hoplites, citizen soldiers fighting not for a king, but for their very way of life. For 11 agonizing straight days, neither side moved. It was a tense, psychological standoff. The Persians, with their superior cavalry, desperately wanted open ground where their horsemen could maneuver and outflank the slower Greek infantry. The Greeks, on the other hand, stubbornly clung to the slopes and broken terrain, knowing that such ground would bog down cavalry charges and expose the lightly armored Persian archers and infantry, with their wicker shields, to the deadly thrusts of Greek spears. It was a perfect stalemate, a grinding test of wills. As the days dragged on, food supplies dwindled, and water became more precious than gold. The harsh reality of war began to bite deep. Persian horsemen constantly harassed the Greek baggage trains, striking at their lifelines. Then, in a critical blow, they managed to seize the Gargaffian Spring, the only reliable source of fresh water for the Greek army. Greek morale, already brittle from watching Athens burn, not once, but twice, began to crack under the pressure. Something had to give. Under the cloak of moonlight, the Greek commanders, including Pausanias and Aristides, gathered for a tense meeting. They decided the entire army would pull back under cover of darkness to a new ridge closer to Plataea, a position that boasted its own wells and a narrower front. This narrower front was key, as it would negate the Persian numerical advantage, forcing them to fight on more equal terms. It was a sensible plan, a calculated risk, if everyone kept their discipline. Spoiler alert, they almost did. As dusk deepened, the retreat began. Thousands of heavily armed men trying to move silently and in formation across uneven, unfamiliar ground in the dead of night. It was a logistical nightmare waiting to happen. The right-wing Spartans and Tegeans, led by Pausanias, filed off first, their bronze armor clinking softly, their footsteps muffled. Then came the center contingents, a nervous mass of various city-states, trying to maintain cohesion. Finally, the Athenians, bringing up the rear, began their withdrawal. But moonlight, even on a clear night, plays tricks. The broken terrain, with its hidden gullies and rocky outcrops, proved treacherous. And then there were the bugle calls, contradictory, confusing, scrambling the columns and sowing doubt. Units got separated, lines became tangled. What was meant to be an orderly, disciplined withdrawal quickly devolved into something much more chaotic. When the first rays of dawn painted the eastern sky, they revealed a sight that must have sent shivers down the spines of the Greek commanders. The army wasn't in one neat, repositioned line. Oh no. Instead, they were strung out, fragmented into 3 separate, isolated clusters, with gaping half-mile gaps between them. It was a disaster in the making. Mardonius, the Persian commander, surveyed the scene from his vantage point, unable to believe his luck. From his perspective, it looked like a full-blown rout. The Greeks, he thought, were finally fleeing in panic, their morale shattered. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the chance to unleash his superior numbers and cavalry on a disorganized enemy. Convinced the Greeks were in disarray and fleeing for their lives, he immediately ordered his cavalry forward, trumpets blaring across the plain. Then, with a roar, the entire infantry mass, a human wave of Persian might, began to advance. Persian horses splashed through the shallow waters of the Asopus River, their riders eager for the kill. What looked, to Mardonius, like a glorious pursuit of a broken enemy, was about to turn into something far more deadly for him. The biggest, most unexpected ambush of the ancient world. The Greeks, battered and disorganized as they were, weren't running. They were about to make their stand. The first wave of Persians, a tide of lightly armed infantry and archers, crashed head-on into the Spartan phalanx. This wasn't some slow-motion movie scene with bronze statues clanking around. These were Spartans. They'd been drilling since they were 7 years old, honed into living weapons. Their training wasn't just about fighting, it was about moving in unison, a single, disciplined entity. Shields overlapped, creating an impenetrable wall of bronze and wood, their long spears, called doru, jabbing in a relentless, rhythmic cadence. The standard phalanx was typically 8 ranks deep, but here, as the frontage narrowed with the terrain, they compressed, perhaps to 4, making their line even denser, even more formidable. Each man didn't just push with his arm. He pushed with the entire bowl of his aspis, his heavy shield, using his body weight to create an unstoppable surge. The entire formation moved like one terrifying, bronze-clad animal. Persian archers loosed volleys of arrows, a deadly rain designed to break formation and sow panic. But bronze armor was thick, and the tightly packed shield wall deflected most of them. Arrows glanced off, harmlessly hitting the ground, or simply lacked the penetrating power against such a dense, protected mass. The range between the two lines kept shrinking, the Persian attack stalling against the unyielding Greek resolve. Then, for a terrifying moment, something threatened to break that perfect rhythm. A lone Spartan, by some accounts named Arimnistos, took an arrow clean through his thigh. A lesser man might have fallen, disrupting the line. But Arimnestos, with an act of almost superhuman will, wedged the butt of his spear into the ground, using it to prop himself up. holding his position even as his friends desperately dragged him backward, out of the immediate fight. That tiny, defiant act of individual bravery, that refusal to yield, steadied everyone. The shield wall, momentarily threatened, firmed up, becoming an even more unyielding barrier. Mardonius, seeing his infantry stall, realized the gravity of the situation. He couldn't let his initial charge fail. In a desperate, bold move, he rode forward, surrounded by his 1,000 elite immortals, their distinctive white shields painted with golden pomegranates gleaming in the morning sun. He was probably trying to rally his troops, to break the Greek line himself. Ancient sources differ on exactly who threw the javelin, or rock, that brought him down. Some say it was a Spartan named Arimnestos, or Aemnestus, an unforgettable name indeed, while others attribute it to a simple soldier, a nameless hero. But everyone agrees on the outcome. Mardonius, the Persian commander, fell from his horse, struck down in the thick of the fighting. When Mardonius fell, the immortals hesitated. For 5 heartbeats, they paused, stunned by the loss of their leader. In the brutal, close-quarters combat of a phalanx fight, 5 heartbeats is an eternity. It was all the Spartans needed. With a collective roar, they crashed forward, pushing with renewed ferocity. The Persian center, suddenly leaderless and demoralized, folded under the relentless pressure. The anvil had struck, and the Persian line was shattered. Meanwhile, on the left flank, the Athenians, under the astute command of Aristides, were engaged in a brutal struggle against the Theban Hoplites. These weren't lightly armed skirmishers. These were armored men, fighting with the same heavy equipment as the Athenians, and they actually outnumbered their Athenian adversaries. It was a tough, grinding fight, a battle of wills between Greeks. But the very gaps that had worried the Greek commanders earlier, those half-mile chasms in their fragmented line, now became an unexpected advantage. As the Persian center collapsed, these gaps allowed the Athenians to execute a daring maneuver. They wheeled inward, turning their disciplined phalanx to hit the Thebans squarely in the flank. This perfectly timed attack came just as the news of Mardonius's death, like a ripple across the battlefield, reached the ears of the fighting Thebans. Demoralized and now outflanked, the Thebans broke. They couldn't hold. The Athenians surged downhill, pressing their advantage, their cheers mingling with the roar of the Spartans. Soon, the 2 allied Greek forces linked up, forming an even more formidable front. Together, the Spartans and Athenians drove the remaining enemy forces relentlessly toward the wooden stockade of the Persian camp. Desperate, the Persian cavalry tried to cover the retreat, attempting to slow the Greek pursuit. But the terrain, which had already proved so difficult for the Persians, now betrayed them again. The ground was cut by dense vines and irrigation ditches, turning the plain into a treacherous obstacle course. Horses floundered, their legs tangling, throwing their riders to the ground. The cavalry, usually so effective, became bogged down, unable to mount an effective counterattack or protect their fleeing comrades. By midday, what had started as a chaotic morning had turned into a total rout for the Persians. The Persians had spent weeks turning their camp into a formidable, albeit temporary, fortress. It boasted earthworks, sharpened stakes driven into the ground, and a ditch wide enough to be beyond a spear throw. It was designed, quite cleverly, to keep the Greeks out. But today, with their field army shattered and fleeing, it became a death trap, designed to keep the Persians in. The Greeks, now a surging, unstoppable force, descended upon the camp. They piled up brushwood against the wooden walls, setting it ablaze. They jammed the gates with abandoned wagons and anything else they could find, preventing escape. Archaeologists centuries later would still find a thick layer of ash at the site, a silent testament to the ferocity of that day. The killing inside the camp was grim, an act of brutal vengeance for the destruction of Athens and years of Persian aggression. Herodotus, the ancient historian, claims a staggering 100,000 Persians died. Modern scholars, using more conservative estimates, suggest maybe 30,000 to 50,000. But either way, it was nothing short of an annihilation. Very few escaped the slaughter. Among the spoils of war were treasures that must have astounded the victorious Greek farmers. Ornate scabbards, intricately crafted gold drinking cups, and even exotic baggage camels, sights most of these men had never encountered in their lives. These weren't just trophies. They were tangible proof of the immense wealth and power of the empire they had just brought to its knees. More importantly, the entire Persian logistics hub in central Greece, the base from which they had planned to conquer the rest of the peninsula, was gone, utterly destroyed. Plataea was more than just another battle. It did more than simply end Xerxes' invasion. It was a seismic event that reverberated through history, shaping the course of Western civilization. This victory proved, unequivocally, that citizen soldiers who owned their land, who voted in their assemblies, and who fought side by side with their neighbors for their shared freedom and way of life, could utterly outperform conscripted troops answering to a distant, autocratic king. The Greeks weren't fighting for a ruler. They were fighting for themselves, for their families, for their polis. That deep personal stake fueled a ferocity and a cohesion that the Persian army, for all its numbers and professional training, simply couldn't match in close combat. It was a profound statement about the power of self-governance and individual liberty. The victory at Plataea secured the Aegean Sea, pushing the Persian threat back across the Hellespont. This wasn't just about geography. It was about safeguarding the very cradle of Western thought. It allowed Greek ideas, concepts like trial by jury, the revolutionary power of theater, the rigorous pursuit of logic and philosophy, and the burgeoning ideals of democracy to survive and flourish. These weren't just abstract notions. They were the seeds that would eventually germinate in Rome, then spread across Europe, and ultimately shape much of the modern world we live in today. Without Plataea, the intellectual and cultural landscape of the world would be undeniably different. The battle also solidified the phalanx, the disciplined shield wall, as the gold standard of warfare. For a century and a half, until Alexander the Great's brilliant mixed formations appeared on the scene, the Hoplite phalanx was the ultimate expression of military might. Its effectiveness at Plataea, where it shattered a numerically superior force, cemented its reputation and influence for generations. In short, the day 80,000 Greeks held together, fighting for more than just a king or an empire, is the day the West stayed West. It was the moment when the trajectory of two vastly different civilizations collided, and the smaller, freer one triumphed, ensuring its legacy would endure. The few Persian survivors, a broken remnant of a once mighty army, limped across the Hellespont, their dreams of conquering Greece shattered. King Xerxes, who had proudly watched his fleet burn at Salamis, never risked another land invasion of Greece. The lesson was learned, brutally and decisively. The Spartans, covered in glory, returned home carrying the bronze greaves of Mardonius, a grim but powerful trophy. It was undeniable proof that even the most formidable empire builders can fall, and that even a king's cousin isn't invincible. The Athenians, with their city slowly rising from the ashes, rebuilt with a newfound confidence. They funded a powerful fleet and within 50 short years were shaping an empire of their own, a testament to their resilience and ambition. On the quiet ridge of Plataea, where the fate of worlds was decided, farmers still turn up arrowheads and spear butts when their spring plows bite deep into the soil. Each find is a tangible reminder, a whisper from the past discipline, intelligent use of terrain, and the sheer, stubborn refusal to quit can turn 80,000 determined individuals into an army that truly changes the world.